At one point, Hello Neighbor was one of the most popular horror games on YouTube. It was almost as if it was on the checklist for most popular Let's Players that lean on horror to play. Marketed as a survival stealth horror game with a focus on story, a learning AI neighbor, and a friendly beta schedule that coincided with most Let's Player schedules, one small game turned into a big franchise. However, did you know about the fact that it had an animated series?
What we need from you is any information you have on Nikki's last known whereabouts.
Exactly! So why haven't you talked to the kids yet?
Around April of 2020, it was shown within the Hello Neighbor Discord a screenshot of a future series with a test pilot not too far after. Then, on July 24th, 2020, the full pilot was released, previously only available to a select few. So now, about 2 years after the announcement, does it still hold up? The episode starts in media res, with a neighborhood showing their concern to the local police about a missing child. One thing you'll probably notice right away is the animation. Oddly enough, the animation doesn't seem to be too much of an issue when looking through the comments of this pilot, but I would disagree. I'm not gonna say that tinyBuild or whoever owned Hello Neighbor at the time was rolling in money with great margins. Indie game development is no joke. However, one of the biggest issues is that with a 21-minute runtime, you have double the challenge of making an 11-minute runtime to keep an audience's attention, and what may help is having something a bit more pleasant to look at. However, one may be able to counterbalance all of that with a good story.
My name is Nicky Roth. My neighbor, Mr. Peterson, is acting very suspicious after his children, Aaron and Maya, gone missing. And I've been watching him for a couple of months now.
So Nikki, the totally not quirky Dipper-light character, decides to track Mr. Peterson's every movement. Coming from the perspective of not using anything within the game to deduce what's happening here, this is a pretty solid, if not unspectacular way to introduce your main story. There's a weird neighbor who may be connected with a lot of weird happenings. One thing you'll notice a lot in this series is that because of its animation budget, a lot of its humor has a ceiling on it, and that's the nicest way to put it. I would imagine if the game is full of a lot of action that the animated series would have benefited with having more slapstick, but it's kind of hard to do that when all of your models are so rigid, thus making squashing and stretching more expensive than the house the neighbor lives in. It also leaves in weird moments, like the neighbor hearing a noise and turning around with an expression that looks closer to joy than shock or curiosity, but when zoomed in closer, it was intended to be annoyance or anger.
It's now or never.
Nikki, you're positive your parents aren't coming back until Sunday?
100% positive. They leave me alone all the time.
This explains a lot.
We are introduced to the wacky cast of characters that we'll be spending a majority of this episode with. Trinity, the team leader, Maritza, the young, daring sister of Enzo or Zoe, the preppy but cowardly and snarky one. And now that we're all seated at the table, I would like to say even the character designs, they're not really that great. Even putting aside the comparisons to mid-2000s internet education website models, there's intentional design choices like Zoe's pimples being such an eyesore in a way that it draws attention to it, as well as the color palette of his outfit in general. Trinity having makeup but also really light lips is a large pet peeve of mine as well. And with Nikki, the triple dots, Hugh from Johnny Test style, it's also just an unappealing choice. I totally understand that in Hello Neighbor the character models weren't made to be like a supermodel or anything like that, but I would argue that the quality of the assets and the textures in general, at least in the first game, at least leaned in this stylized nature that it was in the realm of being palpable. This is just pure budget or pure skill issue. They decide on a rainy day to investigate the neighbor, except they don't. They actually pad out this time with lots of apprehension.
Light aren't working. Hey, easy, Zoe. This is delicate machinery.
Do we want to know where you got all this stuff?
Nope.
It was, it's Aaron's.
Mind you, they get out of the home 3 minutes in, and then they don't enter a home that's across the street that they're already halfway to for another 3 minutes. This entire time is spent being afraid of thunderstorms, complaining about the faulty gear, reacting to the gear not working correctly because it's wet, but not moving to a drier location, or coming up with the plan on the spot, or listening to someone else on their wireless channel, and more hints about Mr. Peterson's missing kids, and asking about Mr. Peterson's whereabouts, and about like 70 other things happen before we get to the house. That's across the street. I'm pretty sure they read every capital all over the world, recited word for word, War and Peace backwards, got their license at the DMV 12 years later, and we're still outside of a neighbor's house. Ironically, the only thing that felt long in this was actually solving puzzles within the game. Point is, we don't need all of this information outside. A lot of the appeal of the game is exploring the home, and they're taking time to get to that point. Now, while in the game, one would have a blast doing all of this, knowing that the neighbor is near and that they have to avoid him. That part is neutered here, as while the neighbor is coming back home, the fact that he isn't home takes some suspense out of it. However, we do get a few trinkets, like seeing Mr. Peterson and his family within a room, and the reintroduction of the crows. And you would think for an animated series, for a pilot animated series, that they would want to introduce more hints, just because this franchise eats hints up. But even a lot of the photos on the walls don't even say anything.
Oh no, he's on the move.
Another big aspect of the game was the puzzle aspect, and because mysteries and puzzles go hand in hand, one would expect that there'd be lots of solving things. But in Hello Neighbor fashion, the animated pilot leaves you with more questions than answers. And listen, I know what I just said, and one may think that this is a good thing because it's a pilot, but I would like to offer you another perspective really quick. Given how expansive the series is with multiple acts, what harm does it do to the series to at least answer a few more questions? Maybe show more of Mr. Peterson so we can get to know more about him. Maybe show what the parents are doing and give us answers there. Maybe have Nick be able to answer some of these things that he finds in the house. This deliberate vagueness only seems like it's the case because there actually isn't an answer for any of these things yet, and that speculation will equal engagement, and thus more questions appear good. In fact, when looking at the poorly maintained wiki, once I was greeted with the sentence, "In this series, and at least in the first episode, there are a few inconsistencies that do not where the first game Hello Neighbor and neither in the books," I realized that a lot of what's happening here, I'm just gonna have to figure it out with my old J brain up here. I'm not 100% sure what the button did. I'm not sure if Mr. Peterson was already driving home. I'm not sure if the crows are following Mr. Peterson. The story clearly wants to appeal to kids, right? But give them nothing. What I'm trying to say is no sane adult should be going down the path that I'm going down right now. And if you think I'm sane, ask your local father and mother what animation reviewers they were watching growing up, because I can assure you, it wasn't a talking panda.
Cheetah here. Everything is fine. I can see in the dark with my cheetah vision.
Lots of movie tie-in games or shows and vice versa. Games made into shows or books made into movies, it needs a proportional amount of effort and budget and care into it, as if it was the first incarnation of whatever the franchise is, in this case gaming. I do understand that a new market is unproven, but I strongly believe that most games, especially if the game already has a cartoony feel, like Hello Neighbor, is already kind of proven to work. You just need a good story, which so far is unimpressive. As the neighbor approaches, they try to find an exit, but an exit finds them. I'm about halfway, and I have to say, this pilot is very incomplete. I know about some of the characters, and I get the general gist of what the neighbor is about, but there's so much that the pilot doesn't want to tell you, that I'm only left somewhat confident about what I just saw. In fact, I almost envy Let's Players in a sense, when they get to play this game, because there's more effort put into the game that you can at least understand that there was intent to have a beginning, middle, and end, regardless of how they decide to implement it. Here, why did the neighbor come back just to go back out again? It only seems like the neighbor came back to introduce artificial tension within the story. Again, you can make a great story out of Hello Neighbor. I'm pretty sure that I can make a great story out of Hello Neighbor. And you can make a great 22-minute pilot out of it, but it depends on what you wish to show us. Although the tracker worked when Mr. Peterson was away the first time, Trinity says that the tracker may not work the second time, which is a little contrived. I don't doubt that a tracker can have a range on it, but how would Trinity know the second time Mr. Peterson can or would drive out of range? Anywho, they decide that the best way to trail a moving car is to cut through a conveniently shown
I
forest.
saw him put a body in the trunk. It looked like,
It wasn't.
but it looked like Maya.
But it wasn't.
Right, it can't be.
But how do you?
Will somebody please finish the sentence?
Self-awareness does not fix the writing here, and it doesn't excuse any of the writing at all. I don't know what it is about the writing style here, but deliberate vagueness is more likely to turn me away from something than pull me closer. Luckily, they wouldn't do this same dialogue style of deliberately cutting off their words to not say what they really want to say a second time, right?
What happened to you up there?
I have no idea. But in Aaron's room, something happened. I mean, maybe.
Huh?
It's just that I could have been.
Mr. Peterson's study. Nikki, it was. We have to tell the others.
They actually did it a second time? You're actually tickling my pancreas here. Why can't they say it? It's very clear that you want us to think about everything that you're doing here.
So say it. Say what? Say the word you want to say. I'm not saying that I want to say it, I'm just saying that I can.
Outside of the forced, vague dialogue, the story is also shaky in this next instance. They're both afraid of the birds, but follow the birds, but are attacked by the birds, and we as a viewer have no idea why there's a bunch of birds in here in the first place. It also doesn't help that it's largely implied that them on foot got to the same location that the neighbor did by car. There's no implication that some time has passed, so why couldn't they just tail the car? Or more importantly, why didn't the neighbor go down the street in that direction? Again, small things like this really help your story. Typically within a mystery cartoon, you'd want your viewers to do this thing called thinking. They approach Mr. Peterson, and I have two questions for him.
No, not this time. Not this time. You're not gonna do this to me again. Not again. Not this time.
Now, quick question. Are they going to do it to you again? And if so, what time are they going to do it to you? And another question, are you blind? I'm only asking because like in 10 seconds after the neighbor puts a doll in the grave and takes out some type of star symbol piece, they get caught and have to run away. And the way this is paced, it appears that the neighbor should know exactly who is spying on them, but in the next scene, he's like a literal AI and can't find who he just saw. And of course, the star symbol falls, and Nick collects it and wants to tell his friends, but with the neighbor on his tail, they all just run away. Assuming that a day has passed, Nick tries to speak to his friends who I assume went to go get the photos developed. Why didn't Nick go along with them? In fact, did these parents just leave Nick by himself and were shocked that he got into trouble and that he was abducted?
Oh, this feels like a very good sign.
Come on.
Really? No police? No FBI, CIA, Men in Black? Nothing? We're just gonna...
Let's see, what's stopping you now? That's what I thought. So, we get into exactly how they've reached the point they did in the beginning of this pilot. Once Nick's parents calls him, after being away from their clearly younger than 13, let alone 18-year-old kid, now the cops are called. Now everyone's concerned. Now everyone wants justice. Like, when you get into actually what this scenario is, it's actually quite messed up. It's also kind of confusing how it all came together. Even the parents don't know who's on the other end of the line. They ask Trinity why she thinks Nick would be with them. The parents are horrible. The neighbor is underdeveloped in a series called Hello Neighbor animated series. The kids are decent, but are given dialogue that deliberately makes things vague for the sake of speculation, and because there isn't enough money for slapstick that looks good, they're just snarky for half of this runtime. They get the photos developed and oh look, right towards the end we get a clue.
Wait, Maritza, what is that?
What?
That right there, in the corner, behind the filing cabinet.
Is that,
It looks like a shoe.
no one was in there with you? You're positive?
No, I mean, I don't think.
And here's the thing, there's no charm with any of these kids. There's no real reason why it took them this long to know anything. I get that it's a pilot and you're trying to sell the idea rather than giving it all away, but take Infinity Train, the short. Within that, I got a great feel of the characters, the show, the environment, and yes, while that is backed by a company that does animation for a living, ideas are cheap. You can tell a great story with Hello Neighbor. They just chose to go down this route, and while I won't deny the success that it has, it could have been a lot better. Even enough for it to actually still be a thing. But until then, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Take care. Alpha out.